Second part. At the foot of the stairs stood a young man, short but sturdily built. He was dressed in ruffled clothes and sported close-cropped hair. For a second, Iriya thought her brother must have just come home from a hunting trip. The kiss of the nobility had prevented the years from changing him. For your benefit, I've had him don the same clothes he wore that evening. Here you are, brother and sister, reunited by chance after all these years. We have plenty of time. By all means, please get reacquainted. A heartbeat later, Iriya realized she'd been set free. As she leapt to her feet with lightning speed, she saw the capped figure vanish into the depths of the darkness. Big brothers and little sisters are a thing for the world of humans. I look forward to seeing what becomes of the bond between you now that one of you is a servant of the nobility. Iriya. The mere sound of his voice left Iriya feeling dizzy. Yawn. You've got to pull yourself together. A tiny voice whispered to her, but its tone was also vacant and dazed. Iriya, you're all grown up, aren't you? Yawn broke into a grin. It was the same warm and dependable smile she remembered from days of old. Her older brother had carried a weapon as heavy as their father since the time he was 10, and used it to bag game just as big, too. Taciturn by nature, he was warned by their mother that folks would take him for a mute. But with his evening drinking, he would give them a friendly grin. And every time he did, Iriya realized it was a treasure. What have you been doing all this time? Are Mom and Dad doing well? No, Iriya replied, shaking her head. What are you talking about? The night the nobles came, their throats were ripped open. They're dead. You, Paul, Chulos, and Maggie all got bitten and were carried off. I was the only one they didn't bite. That is a lie, Yawn said sadly. Why do you say that? It's true. I don't remember it happening. And look at my throat. There's not a mark on it, is there? I saw it, Iriya. I watched the great Count Langland drink your blood. We'd all been bitten already, and you were the last, and then they carried all of us off. If Count Langland hadn't told them to leave you there, you would have met the same fate we did. Now, you must be remembering it wrong, Jan. You're the one who's wrong. Jan gazed patiently at his little sister. What's with your eyes? Why are they red? I'll tell you what happened, okay? Just don't look at me. Iriya. Afterward, I was rescued by a passing witch doctor. He took me on the road with him. With my whole family bitten by nobles and taken away, I couldn't very well stay in that village. After all, there was no saying you wouldn't all come back and attack the place. Then I learned how to use swords and other weapons, and I set out on a journey to find all of you. I wanted to rescue you, if you hadn't been made servants of the nobility yet. If I was too late, I would drive a wooden stake through your hearts before you could hurt anyone else. Who taught you how to use those weapons? Who? Different people. Before you slew Baron Mitterhaus, you took care of Count Zagreb, Duke Schultz, and Baron Lusbon, and you had to deal with Paul, Maggie, and Shaq. Quite an accomplishment. I can imagine what Mom and Dad would call you. Sibling slayer. I didn't have a choice. Iriya protested. The shock had been surprisingly faint. From the instant her blade slid into the heart of the first she dealt with, Maggie, all consciousness of their blood ties had been transformed into something else entirely. Iriya had since stained her hands with the blood of two more siblings. Being servants of the nobility, you have to do whatever you're told. And I had to stop that. Being servants of the nobility, you have to do what you're told. And I had to stop that. And now it's my turn. Jan's smile broadened. His meaty hand grabbed hold of Iriya's shoulders. I know how you feel about me, her older brother said. What's he talking about? Terror squirmed somewhere in Iriya's heart. I knew perfectly well how you viewed me, but there was no way I could accept it. After all, we're brother and sister. His rugged face drew closer. In the old days, he'd often smelled of sweat. Now, however, he carried the stench of blood. But things are different now. You don't have to hide anything, Iriya. I like you too. Jan, don't talk craziness. Why can't brothers and sisters be together? Who decided that? That's a human rule, isn't it? Before Iriya's brother's face approached hers, his powerful chest crushed against her breasts. His waist melded with hers, and her brother's hand slid from her shoulders to her back. Iriya couldn't shut her eyes, which saw those of Jan as they glowed burning red, like coals. Iriya's right hand went for the dagger on her hip. It was still there. Not because Viscount Abidozen hadn't noticed it, but rather because the nobleman had considered Iriya to be a slip of a girl who posed no threat to him. Her weapons had been left alone, and even her longsword had been placed on the floor by her side. Iriya. Her brother sought her lips. Iriya didn't refuse him. Even when her brother reached for the hand she used to grip her dagger, she didn't fight him. Her brother was far more passionate than she'd imagined back in those distant days. He sucked against Iriya's lips so hard it seemed he'd pull them right off, and their teeth made a noise as they banged together. And then there was a scream that fell short of words. Jan leapt back, bright blood gushing from between the fingers pressed to his mouth. His tongue had been bitten clean off. As he stood there frozen with surprise, a dagger plunged into his throat, and while he staggered backward, Iriya pounced on him with her sword in one hand, and split her own brother from the top of the head right down to the crotch. As Jan fell without a word, his eyes weren't those of a brother looking out for his little sister. As if to escape those eyes crazed by loathing and hunger, Iriya made a second swipe, this one from the side, and her older brother, split crosswise from the base of his throat, flew into the air. Still breathing easily, Iriya raced over to the shuddering body, reversing her grip on the longsword, and dealing the final blow to the still pulsating heart. This comes as a surprise, said Viscount Abidozen, his voice drifting out from nowhere in particular. Yet Iriya remained facing straight ahead, her face a mask devoid of all emotion, as she sheathed her blade. I would have thought your feeling for your brother would trump your pride as a hunter, but I see how callously you cut him down. Your great accomplishments up until this point are understandable. Another notch for your belt, sibling slayer. Acting dazed and compliant, and then biting his tongue off. Whoever could have taught you such a tactic? Ignoring him, Iriya mouthed a farewell prayer, then turned to the staircase. There, on the landing halfway up, stood Viscount Abidozen. Is that how you put your relations at peace? Who did you learn this from? And who will pass it on to you? You are a deeply troubled girl. However, I admire your resolve. Your cold-bloodedness. Be mine, child. Then you shall be able to call on the true power that the deities or whoever granted you. He wasn't joking. The look in the Viscount's eye was the same he'd give any beloved noble woman. Look into my eyes, and that is what I would normally tell you. But you are unperturbed by the noble gaze of your brother. It would seem I have no choice but to resort to force. Child, are you prepared to do battle with Viscount Abidozen? Come and get it. Iriya responded with a terrible gleam in her eye. Page break. The carriage was approaching an old suspension bridge. It wasn't one of the nobles' making. About a century earlier, the 600-foot bridge had been designed by humans and fashioned from wood, steel, and cables. The iron plates and bolts supporting it were rusted and loose, leaving it in such poor shape. Some joked about whether it would support the weight of a crossing baby. What would happen when the noble's carriage rode onto it? Or if it was struck with a single arrow, for that matter. A silver arrow scored a direct hit on a floorboard near the center of the bridge, while the carriage was still 100 yards shy of it. An arrow made of silver. Just one. Who would have thought it capable of such destruction? The instant the arrow found its mark, all the nuts and bolts securing the bridge shot into the air. And that was just the start. It was unclear what kind of damage the bridge had received, but it was now pulled back in the direction the arrow had come from, and a few seconds later it plunged toward the rapids 300 feet below, twisting and turning like a dying serpent. Even though no one was present to witness its throes. Page break. It was about 10 minutes later that Dee caught up with the carriage, halted some 20 yards from the cliff. No matter what the speed of his sawbuck horse might have been, it was hard to believe how quickly he'd erased the carriage's lead of a dozen miles. Going straight over to the carriage, Dee checked the interior and promptly returned. "She's not there," he told Meeker, who was crestfallen. Before the boy could ask where she'd gone, the hoarse voice said, "A terrific amount of energy was unleashed here. Before we arrived, a fight of some sort took place." Dee looked around. What had happened? The rocky cliffs and forest to either side of the road had been wiped away, leaving flat land for as far as the eye could see. The plain was so vast, anyone who hadn't known about the existence of the cliffs or forests would have thought about building a home here. How much would this take? He was wondering how much energy would be required to work such a transformation on the place. "Roughly 50 billion, the hoarse voice began, but then a prismatic mist blew their way, like a rainbow born on the wind. In front of Dee on the ground and Meeker on horseback, the mist changed shape, swayed, and in the blink of an eye resolved into a pair of human figures. Miss Iriya. Abidozen. Abidozen. In response to the cries from Meeker and the hoarse voice, the man in the cape made an elegant bow. Surprisingly enough, Meeker bowed his head in return. The nobleman's actions were so refined the boy couldn't help himself. "So good of you to come all this way," the Viscount told Dee and Meeker. From the sincerity in his voice, it seemed he meant every word. However, the girls kept me from doing much. He gazed lovingly at the pale visage of Iriya, who stood like a zombie by his side. Suddenly, his eyes filled with naked hate, and his gaze shot to the plain to his left. "Wherever can you be, you hateful yet remarkable archer? By all means, take another shot once I have dealt with this hindrance." "The bridge was shot out," Dee said, seeming to glean the truth. "With but a single arrow. My driver and the guard both plunged into the ravine below." "Then you can go and join them." A silver flash shot up from Dee's back. The blade came out without a single wasted movement. Powder in all the colors of the rainbow flew through the air. The second the blade had split its head, both the Viscount and Iriya had turned to dust. "I'll be dozen sorcery. Watch yourself," the hoarse voice said. "Stay right there," Dee told Meeker, and then the hunter shut his eyes. He was searching for a sign of the nobleman. "Here I am, right here." And once again the prismatic fog drifted, taking the form of the noble and the huntress. Straight ahead of Dee, and to his right and left and behind him, the unmistakable image of the pair took shape while the Viscount laughed scornfully. "Not even the super-keen senses of a Dampier can see through my pack of duplicates." Now more than 20 Viscounts were undoing the top buttons of the same number of Iriyas and stroking the pale throats that were exposed. The Iriyas groaned in a low voice. For all its loathing, the tone also carried an inescapable ring of desire. Though Dee didn't move in response to her moan, when the Viscounts charged at him from all sides, his right arm flourished his blade, reducing each and every one of the attackers to dust. Quite an accomplishment. I see my duplicates don't return to normal. "So this is the man they call Dee," one of the Viscounts exclaimed, unmistakable fear and admiration in his voice, and then he dashed toward the cliff with Iriya in his arms. "Watch yourself," the hoarse voice urged. Albedozen stood stock still, unable to flee any further, while the hunter's blade rose to strike him down. But at that instant, Dee felt a change in the ground beneath his feet. Though Dee didn't move in response to her moan, when the Viscounts charged at him from all sides, his right arm flourished his blade, reducing each and every one of his attackers to dust. Quite an accomplishment. I see my duplicates don't return to normal. So this is the man they call Dee, one of the Viscounts exclaimed, unmistakable fear and admiration in his voice, and then he dashed toward the cliff with Iriya in his arms. "Watch yourself," the hoarse voice urged. Albedozen stood stock still, unable to flee any further, while the hunter's blade rose to strike him down. But at that instant, Dee felt a change in the ground beneath his feet. He'd stepped out into empty space. Without saying a word and with his sword still raised, Dee was swallowed by the darkness. Second part, end.